Hi, I'm Toby from Bravo Studio.
And I'm Shams from Rowy.
And today we're going to go through how you can build an AI-based native mobile storybook application for your kids really quickly.
And how you can use the same AI functionality in your own apps.
Okay, let's get started. So this is a Figma file of the kid story which we created earlier. It's pretty simple. We have an icon which represents you'll see it as an app. The actual list of stories. So you'll see the stories here and there's a field there to search them. So each story would appear with a picture for the story and then the overview. And then if I turn on prototyping, you can see that that's connected to a list of the pages. So each page will have its own image and there'll be an overview of the page. And then that's connected to the actual page itself, where you have an image, the audio file that's going to play, and then the text. And what we're going to do is connect this up to a backend Rowy, which will automatically create this entire story. So you've taking from a prompt of what the story is about, generate all the images for each of the pages. It will also create the text, then it will create an audio file which you can play in Bravo. So this app is really just going to piece it all together. A couple of other things just to highlight here. You can see here that we've got the tag for refresh pull, which means you pull down, it will refresh the list. So you can see where everything changes. There's also transition there. But other than that, and the prototyping, there's also on the close button, there's an action. Just double click on that, you can see there's an action to go back. So pretty straightforward Figma file. We're going to add a link to this in the description so you can be able to use it yourself. But effectively, we just take that URL of this Figma file, and then we go to Bravo. And then we create a new app, and then I load it in. And this is now pulling in that Figma file with that structure, setting up all in Bravo, and creating a link between them so that you're able to actually see this and update it from Figma and going through to the Bravo. Okay, so it's in. I could publish it now, but at the moment, it's pretty boring. It's just the images from Figma. It doesn't do anything. The next step, and I'll just show you here, if I pull down on my app, this is my phone here, you can see it's available, and there's the icon representing the story. So that's all ready to go. The next step now is going to be to connect it to the API, the backend API that's providing all this functionality, which I'll do next.
Hi. So for the backend, we'll be using Rowy to build out the AI-generated content, such as the images, the text, and the voice. We already prepared the template, so we'll set up the template, then we'll go through it in terms of how it's built. To use a template on Rowy, the first step is creating the table. So this is where we set the name and the table ID and the collection where the data will be stored in Firestore. Now we can create a table. Once the table is created, we need to connect the different APIs we're using. So in this template, we'll be using 3 different APIs. The first one is going to be OpenAI, and that's going to be used for the text generation. So we'll click here to go to the settings page on the OpenAI and create a new secret. And once we create the secret, we can copy it over, and here we can add a new secret in the secret manager and call it AI and paste in the value. And we hit create. So now that's done, we can go here and refresh. Now we see the secret here, so we can select that and then set secret. The same thing here, so we use PlayHT for text to speech, and it's similar, so we can get the user ID and the secret key, and then we can create a secret similar way, but I've already created it earlier, so we can skip ahead. And similarly, we use Stability AI for the stable diffusion model for generating the images. So you can set secret, and then here we deploy the functions. So the functions are what interacts with the different services that we're using. So the image generation and the voice generation is all handled in the Cloud Functions. Usually it takes 2 to 3 minutes, and once that's done, then it will be functional. For now, we can proceed while it's deploying in the background. For interacting with Bravos, we're using webhooks for Bravo to be able to access the individual story and the story pages, and even be able to send in a request to create a story. So we can click publish and it will create the webhooks, and we can click continue, and that's it. So now it's finished. Here we have the information about the template, and we can close that off. And basically, if we look here, this is still building, so we'll wait for that to build. But in the meantime, we can go through how it would work. So we'll create a new row. We can put a prompt in. The prompt is going to be the request for the story, and the response is going to have to create a story for us. The response is going to be generated by OpenAI, and we can see how that's happening. So we can open the column configuration, and here we can see the code. So it's not that overwhelming. Mainly it's the prompt. So this part here will basically the system prompt, which tells the AI agent what it's tasked about and what it's supposed to achieve. So here we're just saying that you're a writer, and then we have a fallback writer if the writing style is not specified. And we ask for different things such as short children's storybook, and we also specify the response types. Here, this helps us parse through the response easily in a programmatic way. So instead of getting text from the AI agent, we're getting back a structured JSON that we can look, what's the illustration string, and then we can use the illustration to generate the image. And we can also assert additional requirements, such as it has to be for children and no explicit content. And you can specify whatever is needed for your use case. And in here, we're saying, like, if you can't create a story, just send out an error. And this will help when we're handling on the app side. And here we're updating the status. The ref is to indicate the document that's being updated, and the status is writing. So this happens before we start making the request, so that on the client side, we can look at the status and say, hey, your story is being written. And for the OpenAI call, we're specifying the model and the temperature. So for the temperature, 0 makes it not creative, more direct and more absolute, and 1 makes it very random. For creative story writing, 0.7 sounds about right. And then here we're specifying the messages. We specify the role, which is going to be the system prompt, and then we pass the content. If there was multiple chats, so if there's an implementation of a chat history where there's like back and forth between the user and the AI, then there is a chat history. But for this use case, we're just specifying a single message, which is the user prompt. And this is coming from the prompt column of the row. And that's it. So once the response is back, we parse it through JSON and we'll get a structured data. So if we look here, this is already built successfully. So we can say the story. Right. So while that's being created, we can take a look at the other functions we have. So the cover is going to be very similar to the OpenAI request, but instead we're calling the Stability AI API. So here we have the API host, and we're using Fetch, which is the JavaScript implementation for accessing APIs. Here we're specifying the base URL of the API, and then the engine ID, which is the latest one that the Stability AI provides. And we pass in the API key. So the API key is coming from the API key we added during the setup process. Basically, we have the API key here, and then we pass in the prompt as a text. And there is also the style preset. So this allows it to specify the style that it's going to generate the image in. Close that. Here we have a column that allows us to select the voice that we want the story to be generated in. And the way this works is it uses a column type, a connector column type. And what this means is that instead of having a static list of items that you can access, we call an API to get the list of available items. And here we're calling the playHT get voices endpoint that allows us to get a list of all the voices that we have access to. This helps us make sure that our app stays up to date in terms of not having a static data or having to update the list of voices available. And as we can see here, now that the response is generated from OpenAI, and we can see it was parsed successfully. So this is the cover, which has a title and illustration. And we can see here is the different pages. So we have here a style preset column in the configuration. We can set the options. We can even set the different colors for each option, which is just for visualization. So we can specify the style that we want to create, and it will update the graphic based on the style. To be able to convert the response into separate pages, we need to create an extension that automates creating a document for each page in the story. So we have this simple sync pages function. So in the track fields, we track the response pages and the styles and the voice ID. So whenever any of these fields change, we run the function. So here we have a required field. So the required field allows us to say, hey, don't run this function if there is no response object in the document. And for the extension body, which is going to be the main function that we're running. And here we're basically getting the style and the voice ID from the row and updating the ref to creating pages, basically going through all the pages in the response and add the document of each page, the style and the voice ID. And this allows us to create the individual pages of the story. So we can save and deploy, and that helps us build the function. But if we look into the pages now, which we can see here that the story text was created, the illustration prompt helps us create the image, the audio file, and to access through the app, we have the webhooks. So to go through the webhooks quickly, we have the create story webhook, which has a verification. So we can specify the verification in terms of this is a Firebase access token. So you can authorize the users with the access token. And this allows you to have certain restriction of who can access which stories based on their access token. You can optionally decide to enable that for your use case or not. And we have conditions which can validate other aspects of the request before running the parser function, which is the main function. And in this case, where the parser function takes in the request, which is going to be in the body, and creates a new document. So when we're returning in the object body, we would be passing in the prompt, and that will create a document with the prompt. And we can also add the writing style and the preset style and the voices to generate the story. We can save. So the other webhooks we have is for getting the stories. So to get the stories, it's the URL endpoint, and we can see here that we query the collection. So here we do the reference, which is the reference to the table, and we call the get function to give us the stories table. And we go through the query and map through the documents in the query to create the stories object here, and we send it back to the client.
Now I'm going to talk a little bit about connecting the Bravo app to a backend. For this, I'm going to use Rowy. So this is Rowy here. Rowy is a great tool that makes Firebase a lot easier to use, make it look a bit like Airtable, which is what it looks like here. We're still giving all the power of Google Cloud. It's also got a big focus on working with AI APIs, so it's a great place to work with those things. And this is the example of building a kid's story. So the idea is you put just a prompt in here what the story is about, and they use AI to generate all the other pieces, the images, the text, and even make a voice to speak out the story and have it in the backend available for an API. I'll let the Rowy guys talk about how it all works separately, but for now I'll just talk about connecting it to Bravo. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is go to webhooks where the APIs are, and we're going to get 3 APIs we're going to use, story, and get a particular story page. Let's start with the stories one. Let's copy the endpoint, and then we're going to go to Bravo, and we're going to create a new collection for APIs, kids stories. There it is. Now we're going to add this request is going to be get all the stories. And then let's put that in there and hit the send. Okay, so that gets a list of stories back, and we want all this data for when we use it later on. So that's that one sorted out. Okay, the next endpoint, we'll get the other endpoints in now. So we'll get a single story. Story. That's that one. I'm not going to finish it off because it needs some parameters, which I'll do in a second. But let's get the last one and then get a single story page. Let's get that endpoint. And then we'll add that in. Okay, there it is. That's in. Okay, so that's those 3 things in. Now I need to go navigate through this. Each story, so if I send this, you'll see this, has an ID. And we need to use that to reference as we work through the app. So I just get this example one to show how this works. So in getting a single story, what we need to do is we need to add in a parameter of the ID of the story. So the parameter ID, and we're going to make it a variable. We do that by doing $ and then ID. Okay, so that's going to be a parameter. And so when we do a test, we put that in as a key. So that's the example value of the ID. And so that means what will happen is when it's called, it'll use this ID parameter. And if I send that, you can see that happening there. So that's working for this. And then we're going to get all this data available for the actual binding later on. Because this is just choosing what data I want. And then we're going to do the same thing again for a single page, because not only do we want to have an ID, so I'll just add that in. Need an ID again, $ ID, but we also want to have a page. So we want to have $page like that. Okay, so that's the things we want to have. And so let's put test values in. So ID, we have the ID as before, and then page, we want as page 1. If we call that in, there it is. So now we've got all the data again. Let's click off the data we want to have. Page index, the text, that's the actual story, the URL for the audio to listen, to speak it out, and the image as well. So we've got all the data we need now. So the last thing I just want to do is just to make sure it all joins up. So if you look at this, you've got the story, which gets us the IDs, and then we get a single story, which has the IDs, but we need to make sure it joins up. So what we have to do, we have to make sure that in selected data, that ID is going to match to the ID of the single story. And it does, because ID, look at query parameters, it is ID, so that's the same. But then we also need to make sure that the selected data for the page index is correct. So the page index is telling us the page index, and we've got it defined as page in the other one, so we just need to change that to being page. So that makes sure that the index, which is the number, the page number, gets passed through correctly. So that will appear as page, and the single story is page 1. So that should all work now fine. So that's it. So that's connected the APIs of Rowy to Bravo, and now we can do the next step, which is binding it. Okay, in this last section, I'll talk about how we connect everything together. We've got the app into Bravo. We've defined how the APIs from Rowy connect to Bravo, and now we just want to bring it together. So I'll just show you what the app looks like now. On the right-hand side is my phone screen. And you can see there, it's just the content from the 3 screens from the Figma files. There's nothing new about that. That's just straight from the Figma file. We now need to make it dynamic. And we do that by just connecting to the APIs we defined earlier. So if I go to the story list, what I need to do is I need to connect it. Okay, the image. Well, the first thing I need to do is we're going to have in the story list what we have. If you look here, let's move my head out of the way. We have a header, which we don't need to do anything with right now. And then we have the story title. What happens? This story title is going to be repeated for each element of the array. So I need to connect that to an array. So I need to go to Kid Stories. And then I want to go to Get Stories, and I want to connect it to the data. This will make this whole box repeat for each story, and I can then connect individual elements inside. So once we've done that, we can go to Story Image. I can go to, say, that's the cover URL. That makes sense. Story title is going to be the title, and then story subtitle is subtitle. Okay, so that's connected that up for that page. And then if I pull to refresh, let me just refresh this. Sync it with Bravo Studio. So I should come out. Probably better. I go back in. Right, so we've already connected up the images and the story titles. So that's done. So the next page is to go to the page list. So once we're in a story, we want to connect up to the images or the pages in the story. So same way again, we want to have a look at the page list. So this frame is one we want to repeat. So we want to connect it to get a single story, and we want it to connect it to the pages. So that's a list there. So that'll make that whole box repeat. And then we want to go into the elements. So there's the page image, or the cover image. We want the page image. On the story title, again, that is, where's the story title? That's going to cover title. And we want the page number, which we've got as page, I think. There we go. So that gets that working. And then finally, we go to the story, the actual story itself. There's no array here, so we just go straight into the description and we connect up the elements. So let's have a look here. We want to have the page number. So we'll go change that to single story page. We want to have the page index here. We want to have let's have a look for the actual text. I think that's the story one we want to have here. So this is the text. And then we want to have the page image, which is the page for that particular story. And I think that's everything. Oh, we also want to connect. We've also got the ability to play audio. So I think we connect that play to the audio URL. Okay, that's it. So now if I refresh this, let me just double check by coming out of this and going back in again. Make sure I picked up all the changes. And you can see now I go into, let's go for the Pikachu one. There is the story, all the different pages, the images for each page. I can go into a particular page. I can read the story, and I can do all those things there. There you go, read the story there. Every page is there. Okay, so that's how you basically get your Kid Stories app working with Rowy and Bravo. Hope it was useful. Please let us know any feedback in the comments. Thank you.